Chapter 47, The Parade. Does it hurt? Brightbill touched the smooth surface where his mother's foot used to be. No, it does not hurt, but it will be difficult for me to walk. The bears huddled behind the gosling and stared at the robot's stump of a leg. Nobody understood how a foot could pop off like that or how Roz could remain calm.
"Roz, I'm sorry my cubs attacked you," said the mother. "Sometimes they're completely out of control."
It's okay. You know how they are at this age.
"I can't thank you enough for saving Thorn. I promise my cubs will never bother you again. Isn't that right?"
Yes, Mother, said Nettle and Thorn together. The robot tried to walk. She bopped up and down on her uneven legs, which worked well enough on the flat surface of the cliff top. But once she entered the forest, her problem became clear. The smooth stump had no grip, and it slipped around on the forest floor. So Roz tried hopping on her one good foot. She took a few crunching hops and then clanged into a tree trunk. A few more hops, and she crashed into the undergrowth. I'm really sorry I broke off your foot, said Thorn as he helped the robot up from the weeds. I forgive you, said Roz. Whether she was capable of true forgiveness is anybody's guess, but they were nice words, and Thorn felt better when he heard them. It looks like I will have to crawl home, said Roz.
Nonsense, Mother Bear said. I have a better idea.
Mother Bear lay flat on the ground while her cubs boosted Roz onto her back. Then Brightbill fluttered onto the bear's broad shoulders, and when they were both safely aboard, the group set off through the forest. The robot was heavy, but she was no trouble for the giant animal. Mother Bear strolled along as if it were perfectly normal for a robot to be riding on her back. They made quite a grand procession, all walking together like that. And the procession became even grander as deer and raccoons and birds and all kinds of other animals joined in. Everyone wanted to see the mother robot riding the mother bear. The group wound its way past ancient trees and over rolling meadows and through babbling streams, collecting more and more curious animals as they went. It was the grandest parade of wildlife anyone had ever seen, and leading the way was our robot, Roz. But the parade couldn't last forever. As the sun went down, the other animals began drifting away one by one, and when the parade finally arrived at the nest, only the original members remained.
Here we are, said Mother Bear, helping Roz down into the garden. Now, wasn't that better than crawling all the way home?
Oh yes, that was wonderful. I cannot imagine a better ending to this day. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was amazing, squeaked the gosling. My friends won't believe me when I tell them I rode across the island on the back of a bear.
I'm glad you enjoyed yourselves, Mother Bear smiled. It's the least I could do after all the trouble these two caused.
Her smile became a frown, and she glared at her cubs, who suddenly took great interest in a pebble on the ground. It was late, and it had been a long, difficult day for everyone. So the bears said goodbye and headed back to their cave. Brightbill and Roz stood in the garden and watched their new friends lumber away. And then the gosling said, Mama, do you think you'll ever walk again? I am not sure, said the robot, but I know who to ask for help. Now go get ready for bed. Chapter 48, The New Foot. Mr. Beaver squinted at Roz's stump. I've never built a foot before. He stroked his whiskers and muttered to himself. There are really 3 problems to solve. The foot needs to grip the ground, and it needs to be durable. And then there's the issue of fixing it to the leg. I might have to consult a few friends. Will she ever walk again? Said Brightbill. What's that? Mr. Beaver was lost in thought. Oh, not to worry. You just sit back and leave everything to me. I love a challenge. Mr. Beaver plunked into the pond and returned a while later rolling a large section of a tree trunk.
Say hello to your new foot, he said, slapping the wood with his tail.
Hello, new foot.
That's the spirit. This beauty is from one of the hardest trees I ever chewed. I just need to make a few modifications.
Mr. Beaver placed the piece of wood next to Roz. He squinted, repositioned the piece, and squinted some more. With his claws, he marked different spots on the wood, and then he put his big chompers to work. The beaver chewed and gnawed and carved up that piece of wood, turning it over and over in his paws. Chit-Chat looked down from a branch and chattered through the quiet moments.
This reminds me of the time I saw a fox catch a lizard by the tail, and somehow the lizard's tail fell off and he got away. And later I saw that the lizard got a new tail. Roz is going to get a new foot and everything will be fine.
The wooden foot took shape, and before long, Mr. Beaver was standing beside a beautiful carving that resembled a boot. He tried to slide it over Roz's stump, but the opening was too small, so he scraped out more wood until it was a perfect fit.
Very good, he said, spitting out wood chips. My friends should be arriving any minute with the next few things we'll need. And there they are now. I'd like you all to meet Bumpkin, Lumpkin, and Rumpkin. But I call them the Fuzzy Bandits.
3 fat raccoons shuffled into the garden, dragging a tangle of vines behind them.
Good day, said Bumpkin. Good day, said Lumpkin. Good day, said Rumpkin.
You might already know this, reader, but raccoons have very nimble hands. And the Fuzzy Bandits use theirs to skillfully tie those vines around the robot's leg and around her new foot. The vines caught nicely on all the dings and dents and scrapes. Once they were tied good and tight, Mr. Beaver threw back his head and hollered, "Trunk tap! We could use your assistance!" There was silence, and then 3 quick taps echoed down from the forest canopy.
Ah, that'll be him.
A very handsome woodpecker swooped into the garden. "You called?" came the woodpecker's musical voice.
Indeed I did. Everyone, this is my woodpecking pal, Trunk Tap. Now, Trunky, we need some tree resin, the really sticky stuff. Can you help us out?
Of course I can. You've got a perfect pine right there. Trunk Tap hopped over to the crusty old pine and pecked a few deep holes in the bark. Thick, syrupy resin began oozing down the trunk. Mr. Beaver scooped up the handfuls of the resin and smeared it all over the wooden foot and the vines until everything was glistening with stickiness. And when the resin dried, a short time later, Roz's foot was finished.
"This is wonderful," said the robot as she strolled around her garden. "I am as good as new."
Mr. Beaver and Trunk Tap and the Fuzzy Bandits went away feeling pretty happy with themselves. They'd done a very nice thing. But it was the first wooden foot any of them had ever made, and within a week the vines were coming undone and the foot was sliding loose. So they returned, determined to get it right. They found even harder wood and even tougher vines. They experimented with resin, heating it by fire, letting it boil and thicken until it became an indestructible glue. They kept tinkering with their design until finally Roz had herself a wooden foot that she could rely on. Huzzah! Mr. Beaver rapped his knuckles on the new and improved creation. I knew we'd get it right. Roz moved slower than before, and she had a slight limp, but she was back to her old self again, and that was a relief to everyone, especially Bright Bill. Chapter 49, The FLIER. With coaching from his mother, Bright Bill was becoming a truly exceptional flyer. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he was the smartest. You see, he and his mother had started studying the flying techniques of other birds. They'd sit for hours and watch how hawks and owls and sparrows and vultures moved through the air. Then they'd go up to the grassy ridge and Bright Bill would practice what he'd learned. Soon, he was diving and swooping and darting and soaring around the island. The adult geese frowned at his flying tricks, but the goslings thought he was amazing. Each morning, a gaggle of them would wait on the water for Bright Bill to lead them into the sky. And then, a few hours later, he'd return home to Roz, shaking. feathers and honking about his latest airborne adventures.
Mama! The other goslings didn't know that warm air rises, so I found an updraft and we spent the afternoon circling around and hardly flapping our wings at all. Mama, did you see that lightning storm today? We knew there was trouble when the wind started blowing from the north, so we flew down to some shrubs and waited for the storm to pass. Mama, we just tried to fly in formation. We all took turns at the point, but everyone liked following me best, so I led most of the time.
Chapter 50, The Button. Bright Bill was thinking about the small button on the back of his mother's head. His mother was thinking about it too. They couldn't stop wondering what would happen if the button were pressed, and one day they decided it was time to find out. Roz sat on the floor of the nest. Her son nervously stood on a stone behind her. "I am ready when you are," said the robot.
"Okay,"
said the gosling.
"Here we go."
Bright Bill took a deep breath. Click. Roz's body relaxed. Her quiet whirring slowly stopped, and her eyes faded to black.
"Mama, can you hear me?"
There was no answer. Bright Bill waddled around and looked at his mother's face. Her strange spark of life had gone out. The gosling had never felt more alone. He was ready to switch her back on, but what if she didn't wake up? What if she woke up different? The gosling was afraid to press the button, and he was afraid not to press the button. Bright Bill took a deep breath. Click. Roz's body tensed. Her quiet whirring slowly started. Her eyes began to glow.
"Mama, can you hear me?"
"Hello, I am Rozum, Unit 7134, but you may call me Roz." The robot spoke these words automatically in a language Bright Bill didn't understand. His little heart raced as his worst fears seemed to be coming true. But a moment later, her familiar voice returned, and the robot said in the language of the animals, "Hello, son. How long was I out? It seemed like only an instant to me."
"You were out for a few minutes,"
said the gosling as he hugged his mother,
"but it seemed like forever to me."
Chapter 51, The Autumn. The days were getting shorter, the air was getting crisper, and one morning Roz walked out to find a layer of frost on the garden. Autumn had come to the island. The tree leaves, which had been green for the robot's entire life, turned yellow and orange and red. They let go of their branches and floated down to the ground, and the forest gradually filled with the sounds of creatures scurrying through dead leaves. Tree nuts were also falling, thunking onto roots and rocks and occasionally clanging off the robot. The smell of flowers faded as blossoms withered. All the rich scents and colors of the island were draining away. The animals were also changing. Furry animals were growing more fur. Feathery animals were growing more feathers. Scaly animals were starting to look for new homes.
"Here, it's cooling off,"
croaked one frog to another.
"Before long, it'll be time for sleeping. Ribbit, yerp, I better start looking for a good hole,"
croaked the second frog.
"Have you found one yet?" "Nah,"
croaked the first frog.
"I'll look for a hole next week. For now, I'm going to enjoy the warm sunlight while it lasts. Yerp."
Many of the island's animals were already thinking about their winter hibernation. Frogs, bees, snakes, and even bears would soon disappear and spend the next few months resting out of sight. And then there were the birds. Some birds, like owls and woodpeckers, would spend the winter nesting and eating the island's few remaining edibles. But the migratory birds were preparing for the long journey south to their warm wintering grounds, and among the birds destined to leave were the geese. Chapter 52, The Flock. Bright Bill slowly waddled into the nest. He had a confused look on his face.
"Mama, the other goslings said that we have to leave the island soon, and we won't return for months and months. Is that true?"
"That is true," said Roz. You know that geese migrate south for the winter.
Will you migrate with us?
I cannot fly or swim, so I will spend the winter here on the island.
Can I stay with you?
I do not think that's a good idea. I think you should migrate with the flock.
How long will the migration take?
Said Brightbill.
Where will we fly? When will we come home?
I do not know, said Roz. Let us go ask the others. And so the robot and the gosling walked around the pond to where Loudwing and her friends were chatting. Hello, everyone. Brightbill has some questions about the flock's upcoming winter migration.
And we'd be happy to answer them, said Loudwing. What would you like to know, little one?
How long will the migration take? Said Brightbill. Where will we fly? When will we come home?
It'll take us a couple of weeks to fly south, said Loudwing, depending on the weather. We'll join the other flocks at a beautiful lake in the middle of a great sprawling field, said another goose. And we'll come back to the island after 4 or 5 months, said someone else, depending on the weather.
As they walked back to the nest, Brightbill said to his mother,
Lately I've been feeling this strong urge to fly, not just around the pond or the island, but to go on a long flight, a journey.
Those are your instincts, said the robot. All animals have instincts. They help you survive.
Do you have instincts?
Said the gosling. I do have instincts. They help me survive also.
My instincts are definitely telling me to fly south for the winter, said Brightbill. I just wish you could join us. I'm going to worry about you while I'm away.
Do not worry, I will be fine, said Roz. How bad could winter be? Chapter 53, The Migration. It was the night before the migration, and Brightbill was sleeping fitfully. Roz watched him toss and turn until he finally crawled up into her arms, and she rocked him to sleep just like the old days. Early the next morning, Brightbill waddled outside and looked at the pond. The water was perfectly still. A few lazy clouds drifted above. Geese were already gathering by the beach, and then tiny claws scampered down from the treetops.
So today's the day, huh?
Said Chit Chat, perched on a branch.
You're going to see so many new things and meet so many new animals, and if there are any squirrels at your wintering grounds, please tell them that Chit Chat says hello.
Today is the day, said Brightbill. The flock will be leaving soon.
Are you excited or nervous or scared?
I'm all of those things, the squirrel whispered.
Well, don't worry about your mother. I'll look after her so you know that she'll be perfectly fine.
Brightbill smiled. I am afraid it is time to go, said Roz as she stepped out of the nest.
Okay, Mama, said the gosling. See you in the spring, Chit Chat. Have a nice migration, Brightbill.
The squirrel scampered back into the treetops.
Come home with lots of exciting stories, but not too exciting because I don't want anything scary to happen to you. Goodbye.
The geese were honking with excitement and hustling around as they made their final preparations. Several of the fathers huddled together, discussing their flight plans, while the mothers took a head count.
There you are, Brightbill, Loudwing honked from the middle of the crowd. We're just about to begin.
May I have your attention, please, said the biggest goose. As most of you know, my name is Longneck, and I'll be leading this year's migration. I'm asking everyone to please join your families for takeoff. Once we're all airborne, each family will take its position in our V formation, and we'll start for the first leg of our journey. Are there any questions?
I have a question, came a booming voice. My son will not have any family with him. Where does he fit into the formation?
Everyone turned to Longneck.
He can fly with me, said the big goose. I hear Brightbill is a very clever flyer. I could use his help at the point.
A moment later, the geese began flapping and honking and making their way into the air. A cloud of feathers floated down around the robot and her son. "You are not a gosling any more," said Roz. "I am very proud of the fine young goose you have become." Brightbill fluttered up to his mother's shoulder.
"Thanks, Mama."
The goose wiped his eyes.
"Is this where we say goodbye?"
"This is where we say goodbye for now. Spring will soon be here, and we will be together again."
"I'm going to miss you,"
said Brightbill as he nuzzled his mother. "I am going to miss you too," said Roz as she nuzzled her son. The goose took a deep breath, and then he shook his tail feathers, flapping his wings, and joined the flock. At first, the geese flew in a disorganized jumble, but each goose slowly drifted in position until the flock formed a wobbly V. At the lead was Longneck, and behind his left wing was Brightbill. They circled in the sky until the V pointed south, and then the geese began their long migration. Roz climbed to the top of a tree and watched as the flock slowly faded into the horizon. Chapter 54, The Winter. The island was quiet. The migratory birds had all left, the hibernators were asleep, and everyone else had begun their simple winter routines. Everyone but Roz. Now that she was alone, our robot didn't know what to do with herself. She stood in her gray garden and watched a sheet of ice slowly form on the pond. Sometimes she could hear her good friends, the beavers, going about their business beneath the ice, and she wondered when she would see them again. Roz stood there until snowflakes started drifting down from the sky. The flakes swirled in the breeze and slowly piled up on the ground and on the trees and on the robot. So she crouched into the nest, slid the stone door behind her, and sat in darkness. Hours and days and weeks went by without the robot moving. She had no need to move. She felt perfectly safe in the nest, and so, in her own way, the robot hibernated. Roz's body relaxed. Her quiet whirring slowly stopped. Her eyes faded to black. She probably could have spent centuries like that, hibernating in total darkness, but the robot's hibernation was suddenly interrupted when a shaft of sunlight fell upon her face and carried energy back to her empty battery. Roz's body tensed. Her quiet whirring slowly started. Her eyes began to glow. "Hello, I am Rozum, Unit 7134, but you may call me Roz," the robot said automatically. When all her systems were up and running again, Roz noticed that she was surrounded by broken branches and piles of snow. The roof of the nest had caved in, and the lodge was now flooded with sunlight. Roz felt more energized with each passing minute, but she also felt cold. Her joints felt stiff and brittle, and her thinking was slow, so she got up, cleared a spot on the floor, and made a fire. The snow inside the nest began to melt, and the robot's sensors began to thaw, and when she was ready, she climbed out through the hole in the roof and into a bright foreign landscape. The world Roz had known was now covered in a thick layer of snow. Tree limbs bent to the ground under heavy sleeves. The dark pond was now pure white. The only sounds were Roz's own crunching footsteps. Faint wisps of steam curled up from the robot's body as she trudged through the forest. Roz plunged a hand into a lump of snow and pulled up a long stick. She snapped it in half and flung both pieces back to the nest. She took a few more steps and picked up a fallen tree. She hacked it into smaller pieces and flung them back as well. Then she reached down to another snowy shape, but what she pulled up was not a piece of wood. It was Dart the weasel. He was frozen solid. Roz stared at his stiff body for a moment, then decided it was best to leave the poor thing where he was. As the robot continued gathering wood, she found more victims of the cold. A frozen mouse, a frozen bird, a frozen deer. Had all the island animals frozen to death? No, not all. There were a few fresh tracks in the snow. As we know, the wilderness is filled with beauty, but it is also filled with ugliness. And that winter was ugly. A devastating cold front that had swept down from the north and brought dangerous temperatures and huge amounts of snow. The animals had prepared for winter, but nothing could have prepared the weaker ones for those long nights when the temperature plummeted and the wind whipped over the island. Roz returned to the nest where the fire had melted the interior snow to a muddy soup. She took a minute to warm her body by the flames, and then she began the repairs. She patched up the hole in the dome with the latticework of branches before adding a layer of mud and leaves, and soon the repairs were complete. But another snowfall might cave in the nest all over again, so Roz decided to keep a fire going day and night to prevent snow from building up on the roof. The robot brought in load after load of firewood, and each time she went outside, she was reminded of the frozen weasel and mouse and bird and deer. How many other frozen animals were hidden beneath the snow? Before going in for the night, she called out to whoever was listening, "Animals of the island, you do not have to freeze. Join me in my lodge where it is safe and warm." Chapter 55. The Lodgers. Firelight spilled out from the nest and into the cold, blustery night. Roz sat inside and listened to the wind and to the soft pops and crackles of burning wood. And then the robot's keen hearing picked up another sound, tiny footsteps crunching through the snow.
Roz, I'm freezing. Can I join you by the fire, please?
Said a weak voice. Into the light crawled Chit-Chat. The squirrel was shivering, and clumps of ice stuck to her fur. When she finally felt the heat of the fire, she collapsed. Roz picked her up off the floor, gently placed her on a warm stone, and let her sleep. An hour later, there were more footsteps, and a family of hares shuffled into the nest. They huddled together in a corner without saying a word. Pinktail the opossum was the next to arrive. "Good evening," she mumbled, trying to act cheerful. "It certainly has been a chilly." Swooper the owl hobbled in, followed by some chickadees and a magpie. Fink knew a good thing when he saw it, and the fox lay down right by the fire. Then came Dig Down the groundhog. The fuzzy bandits carried an old turtle named Crag, who was in the worst shape of all. Creatures who should have been hibernating deep underground had been roused by that vicious weather. Only the healthiest animals with the warmest homes were safe. More and more weary animals appeared, and slowly the lodge filled up. This was the first time many of the lodgers had seen fire, and they gazed at it with a mixture of fear and hope. They could feel the fire's destructive power, but they could also feel its healing power as it warmed their bones. The lodgers seemed to push forward, eager to feel more warmth, and then pull back, afraid of feeling too much. It was important that the lodgers understood fire, so Roz showed them how to build one. She showed the smaller animals how to arrange the kindling, and she showed the bigger animals how to arrange the logs. Bumpkin, Lumpkin, and Rumpkin struck the firestones together, and everyone cheered when they finally managed a spark. As Roz looked around, she saw moles curling up beside an owl, a mouse snuggling between two weasels, hares nestling against a badger. Never before had the robot seen prey and predators so close and peaceful. But how long could the peace possibly last? "I propose a truce," said Roz. "Like the dawn truce, everyone must agree not to hunt or harm one another while in my lodge." "Very well," said Swooper after consulting his carnivorous friends. "We hunters will control ourselves." "Then it is settled," said Roz. "My home is a safe place for all." One by one, the lodgers each fell into a deep sleep. Even the nocturnal creatures, usually wide awake at that hour, gave in to the coziness of the nest. The robot stood out of the way and quietly tended to the fire as her guests slept through the night. Only when daylight was streaming in through the door did the lodgers finally begin to stir. "You are all welcome to stay here as long as you like," said the robot as the animals rubbed sleep from their eyes. "My home is your home."
Thanks a lot, Roz.
Fink carefully stepped over a hare and a woodpecker on his way to the door.
I don't think I would have survived another night on my own. It's just too bad we can't cram in a few more creatures in here.
And the fox slipped outside. The robot looked down at the fur and feathers that now carpeted the floor. The nest had been completely full that night. If any more animals showed up, they'd be left out in the cold, but Roz was not about to let that happen. Chapter 56, The New Lodges. The second lodge would have to be bigger than the first if it was going to fit Broadfoot the bull moose. He was a towering hulk of an animal and had a thick coat of fur, but even he was struggling with the frigid temperatures. Broadfoot lived on the other side of the pond in a dense section of forest that was home to many animals, most of whom were in desperate need of a good thaw. The winter days were short, so there was no time to waste, and rather than walking all the way around the pond, Roz tested its frozen surface to see if it was safe to cross. She threw a heavy rock high in the air and watched it bounce off hard ice. Then she carefully walked over the ice and into the forest on the other side, where she found Broadfoot waiting for her. The moose quietly led the robot to the clearing in the trees where the new lodge would go. Then Roz made a fire and watched as cold creatures began crawling out from the shadows. "Do not worry," the robot said to the growing crowd, steam puffing from their noses. "You will all be warm soon, but I need your help." Roz asked the animals to collect anything useful they could find: large stones, strong branches, chunks of frozen mud. With the robot's building expertise and the small army of helpers, construction of the second lodge didn't take long. The animals happily agreed to the robot's truce, and then they shuffled into the warm wooden dome. "If you keep the fire alive, it will keep you alive," explained Roz as she dropped another log onto the flames. "But be careful, fire can turn deadly in an instant." At dawn, heavy snow was falling again, and there was Roz setting out from the nest to build a third lodge. She trudged into the great meadow where fierce winds had created enormous sweeping snowdrifts, but she powered through and finished the job and was soon beginning work on a fourth lodge and then a fifth. The island became dotted with lodges that all glowed warmly through those long winter nights, and inside each one, animals laughed and shared stories and cheered their good friend Roz. Chapter 57, The Fire. Strange sounds were echoing from the far side of the pond. What started as a low murmur gradually swelled to a chorus of terrified voices. There was an eerie glow in that part of the forest, and a thick plume of smoke began rising up from the snowy treetops. Roz charged across the ice and found the second lodge completely engulfed by a raging fire. Frightened animals were running in every direction, fleeing for their lives through the deep snow. "What happened?" shouted Roz as Broadfoot galloped wildly past. "We put too many logs in the fire pit," he said without stopping. "The flames climbed up to the ceiling."
"My baby is still in there!" cried a mother hare, pointing at the burning lodge. "Somebody help, please!"
Roz didn't hesitate. She plowed through the snow and ducked into the lodge. Flames and smoke were everywhere. A tall stack of logs blazed in the fire pit, and in the far corner, a tiny ball of fur was shaking with fear. Crouching low, the robot wound her way beneath the smoke and around the flames and gently scooped up the young hare. "Do not worry," Roz yelled over the roar of the fire. "You are going to be okay." She turned to leave, but the doorway had started to crumble, so she shielded the hare with her body and smashed right through the walls of the lodge. Sizzling pieces of wood went flying as the robot and the hare burst outside into the soft snow. "Oh, darling, you are all right," cried the mother hare, pulling her daughter close. "Thank you for saving my baby, Roz." Now that everyone was safely away, the robot turned her attention to putting out the fire. Her glowing eyes darted around as she computed a plan. Then, with all the strength in her legs, Roz launched herself high up into the snowy branches of the nearest pine tree. A moment later, the tree was shaking violently, and heaps of snow were sliding from its branches and pouring onto the flames like an avalanche. Steam hissed up through the smothering mound of snow. The flames quickly died, the snow quickly melted, and within minutes all that remained was the charred foundation of the lodge. Roz dropped down from the tree and waited as the frightened animals slowly returned. Then she said to them, "Would you like another lodge?" The animals looked at one another, unsure of what to do. Understandably, they were afraid of another fire breaking out, but they were far more afraid of the deadly cold. So they pulled together and worked with Roz and built a bigger, better lodge on top of the old one. It had a taller ceiling and a deeper fire pit. It was made with more rock and less wood, and it had a supply of water for emergencies. But the most important safety features of this rebuilt lodge were the lodgers themselves, who now had a whole new respect for fire.